Hello, colleagues. This is week 4, Asynchronous Lesson Planning, Critique, C3 Framework, and you. The first question I want to ask you today to think about as we prepare is how many continents are on the Earth and how do you know? So how many continents are on the Earth and how do you know? We're going to start there, jot down an idea or an answer, and then we're going to observe some of these different opportunities to take a look at the continents. What do you see here? What do you notice? If you said that these are organized by country, you are absolutely correct. What do you see here? What do you notice? If you said that this is a topographic map and that this is a particular type of projection, you would be absolutely correct. Now, what do you notice? What do you see here? This is an alternative type of projection and one that we read about in our lesson plans. But for many of us, we don't recognize the true size of the continents and countries surrounding us. We in the United States often position ourselves as the center of the world. And so often we miss others' perspectives. In this Mercator projection, the United States looks to be about equivalent to the size of Middle Saharan Africa. But then if we look at this map, we can see that Africa is quite larger. This is the Peters World Map, which is the one that our book talked to us about being more accurate. Here we see the United States fitting into Africa as a continent because Africa is a continent, not a country. Often in our instruction, we legitimize some voices and ideas over others. I ask you, did you say that there were 7 continents? This is probably what you were taught in the United States, but there are other ways of grouping continents and countries. So here's the 6 continent combined Eurasia model. Here's a 6 continent combined America model. So this is used in other portions of the world. And finally, model that is also promoted in various spaces in the world. So even our assertions about maps and how to use them can be faulty. This requires us to constantly evaluate and reconsider lessons that we teach and are teaching in our classrooms. During our critique project, we're going to examine opportunities for reviewing social studies materials. These can be materials you have in your classroom, an online textbook that I provide for you, or a lesson you find, or wherever you like to get your lesson materials. The reason we are doing this critique is to make sure that the materials match the content of the standards we're intending to teach. So an example would be, this is a grade 2 objective that students are going to understand ideas about civic life, politics, and government. The lesson comes with no instructions. It just comes with the directions that we're going to write words that come to mind when you see these symbols. However, if I'm going to understand, which is quite a difficult concept, ideas about these concepts, then this lesson plan doesn't do a great job of providing students the necessary information to respond to these prompts. So I'm going to have to do some more work. I found this lesson on the Great Migration and urbanization and the effects and causes. I rewrote it to match a grade 4 standard that describes the impact of immigration to the United States and cultural development. I want to focus specifically on how students in the state of Michigan understand their context and the other individuals that they live around. This is from Active Classroom. Here's another example. Pause the video for a moment and think about whether or not this meets the objective. This is also from 180 days of classroom experience. The objective is to understand, which, how do we assess understanding? How democratic values came to be and how they've been exemplified by people, places, or people, events, and symbols. The directions are to read the text, which is this, and answer the questions. I'm not sure how this objective is exemplified by this. Here's an example of my critique. I started with this lesson plan on the 7 continents, which is a geography lesson that they suggested for kindergarten math. The introduction was going to sing the continent song, which is 7 continents on the earth. Count them now with me. North America, South America, Africa makes 3, Europe, Asia, Australia. Here we go. Don't forget Antarctica, the 7 on the globe. Hey, but we just talked about how complex the different continents can be. To critique this lesson by rewriting it or writing on top of it and connecting it to first grade standards of distinguishing between land masses and bodies of water. I then unpacked this standard. We are looking at the differences between the nouns and the verbs. So go ahead and watch this video, and we're going to unpack a standard together. What I would like for you to do is to select a grade level standard from the Michigan State Social Studies standards so that you can begin unpacking. I'm going to select a standard for this work. Go distinguish between land masses and bodies of water using maps and globes. Would be here. I recognize that students need to distinguish between land masses and bodies of water using maps and globes. So I'm going to think about the nouns, land masses, bodies of water, maps, and globes. These are the concepts that I need to be introducing my students to. Then I also need to think about distinguishing and using. So essentially, students need to be able to tell the difference and use what they learned. This meets the themes of people, places, and environments, as well as global connections, and it asks students to do the work in this standard. So essentially, what we are learning today is that students can use maps and globes to distinguish or tell the difference between land masses and bodies of water. This standard is pretty straightforward. I critiqued this lesson by saying that it did not meet standards and objectives. While it introduced students to the continents, it didn't have them think about the differences and similarities or what makes land land and water water. It also didn't have students identify the continents by name, but shared cutouts of pieces of paper, which could lead students to see the continents as disconnected or privilege some over others. The work that you're going to be doing today is taking these original lesson plans and rewriting them in your own shorthand. These don't even have to be full sentences, but really they are notes to yourself about how you're going to teach this lesson. In this example, I talk about distinguishing between land masses and bodies of water. I see that I have my global connections, and my example would be that I use a bottle of water to have students begin to tell me what they see. My hope would be that they're making connections to the liquids and solids. Thereby, I can connect this lesson plan to science. I can connect it to any other work that we've been doing in the classroom. And then I have them talk about the differences between land and water as a connection. Do they know the differences? How? What about in pictures of land and water? What about on maps? What is a map? How about a globe? Students would be doing a lot of discussion. And after about 5 minutes or so, I would stop them and say, today, I want to teach you that there are two primary pieces that we have to look for anytime we see a map or a globe: the water and the land. We call these land masses continents. How many are there? How do you know? So I'd have students do some of the thinking work we did at the beginning of class. I'd then define for them that maps are representations of our physical world, and I'd ask them to think about the differences between these lands and waters. They'd have a variety of different maps at their tables, and they'd have the opportunity to take Play-Doh and smush it over the different land on the map in front of them. Then we would potentially color some maps. This would be a couple-day process. But essentially, I'm turning a lesson that came from a quick song and memorization into something that students are actively engaging with maps. They're building, they're using tactile resources, and hopefully they're learning the concepts of the differences between maps and globes, land masses, and water. This is just one example of a lesson critique. Your job for next week is to select 2 different lessons that you can critique. If you need online resources, there are links to these online textbooks in our shared drive. Here's an example of one of those lesson plans, which already has the state standards. Okay, so you are going to take this lesson critique and make a copy. It says, for this project, you're exploring pre-existing lessons found in your district or through online sources. You will bring 2 lessons to class. You'll review these lesson plans with partners, so that's what you're going to do next week, but should come prepared with a physical copy or a copy of the lesson plan from the online source.
Today is what the College Career and Civic Life Framework offers for social studies state standards. This is connected to the state of Michigan social studies standards and their purposes. So, as stated here, social studies instruction is to develop understanding and civic efficacy. So, the grade level content expectations, that's your state standards, are working in concert with the 4 dimensions of the C3 framework. C3 stands for college, career, and civic life readiness. As we can see in this sequence of study, students focus with myself and others and extend out into the other content areas, expanding their horizons. There's actually a type of curriculum called an expanding horizons curriculum, which starts with myself and moves outward into the world. You can see that's modeled here. Essentially, the inclusion of the C3 or civic life framework includes instructional shifts, making inquiry the key to social studies instruction. You can read these expectations as well as how the C3 framework is not assessed on state level assessments, but it is something that you can find online. You'll be using standards from our state of Michigan templates to redesign the lesson plans you're critiquing and also include some of the 10 themes for social studies practice from the National Council of Social Studies. These 10 themes are something that can be addressed completely in a lesson plan, but often we pick 1 or 2 to match our lesson planning and make sure that we hit all 10 across the year. If you'd like to read more on developing state and local standards, there's an article from Social Education linked here where you can take a look at how the C3 framework was driven. You can also take a look at the responsibilities of civic participation that was found in the Michigan State Social Studies Standards so that you understand that there are just 4 disciplines approached at the state level, but I would counter that responsible citizenship also includes behavioral science. The C3 framework and the arc of inquiry starts with investigative questions, develops how students can assess different types of content, and ends with decision-making and civic involvement. These standards, this is quite a lengthy document, but super quickly, the primary purpose is that we master these 4 different components and that we support our students in having critical questions that they can ask and answer through the use of different strands, frameworks, and evidence. So students are going to learn social studies content by focusing on inquiry. This is going to require knowledge and experience, and that students learn to be citizens by working together as citizens. That's why in our lesson critiques, we're really looking for students diving into the content and making sense of it. You can come back and take a look at these slides, but I encourage you to look in particular at how the lessons are scaffolded as students grow. For example, here in the beginning, students describe roles and responsibilities of people in authority. Then they distinguish those responsibilities and how they're used at different branches. And finally, how the powers and responsibilities of citizens and political media and such work in these different contexts. And then in the upper grades, they're distinguishing the powers and responsibilities of everyone from local all the way to international civic and political institutions. So this connects to the standards we saw before. You can see these throughout the civics goals. Oh, my puppy is dreaming. Do you hear her roughing in her sleep? She's okay. She's just having a dream. Maybe she's chasing something. Here are the economic standards, geography standards. Again, look back at the slides to see how these grow. You can use these standards if you prefer over the Michigan State Social Studies standards because these have been adopted at the national level. The NCSS, or National Council for Social Studies, does not dictate what states teach. This provides for a lot of difference in how different states and localities teach social studies, which will mean that I need you to look into the different resources and standards that you have available at your district level. Later in the semester, we will begin developing questions and planning inquiries to facilitate use of the IDM lesson planning template. A little bit of information on our Capstone Project. This is in lieu of class on May 27th. You can choose one of these Capstone projects. It'll take a few hours, just like class would, and you can select something based on your interests. The first option is to create an example curriculum map for social studies. This could be using what's already present in your social studies curriculum map for your district and extending it by adding critical links, by adding standards, by making sure it makes sense, by reorganizing it in a way that works for you. So here's an example on the left-hand side of a standard, and then some essential questions, essential information, and resources. I've also linked another example down below, but there's lots of different examples online. So check that out. Another option is the museum visit and class preparations. You can do one of two things. You can either visit with me on June 4th from 10 to 12 or June 17th from 10 to 12 with a variety of other students, or you can come on another day that works for you or engage in a virtual museum visit. The point of these activities would be to prepare prior to coming to the museum, during the museum event, and after, including a reflection. If you come while students are there, you'll see some of that work done by myself and Sue Ellen Christian, the museum curator exhibitor. And we can talk more about how to use museums and field trips in your classes. Another option is to create an artifact inquiry. This would be based on any artifact that's meaningful to you and would result in a one-page lesson plan. This is a method of having students examine an artifact up close and present something about it. So you can take a look at the IDM template, an example plan that is not about an artifact, but mirrors one we'll do later this semester, as well as an example of a full IDM lesson plan on a topic of your choosing from the website. We're going to develop one of these IDM plans that includes a single page lesson plan later in the semester. You can replicate that project for your capstone on a different topic if you wish. You may also complete a History Day project. History Day is an observance every year. It is something that engages students at the upper elementary and middle school level, and students can pick from documentaries, exhibits, papers, performances, or websites that explore a history project of their choice. So that said, you can do one of two things. You can either create one of these based on a history project and following the expectations on the website for National History Day, or you could prepare a lesson teaching your students about History Day and an outline of what that project would look like for them. So you can either be the teacher or the learner or both. Finally, you can prepare a social studies for a better world project. This would mean that you're taking one of the examples of a project in the text and you're presenting it to your students, or you're rewriting or revising a lesson plan based on their explanation as an addition to the projects we're already doing in class. You can use instructional plans and activities to prepare for an assignment and write me a reflection on that, or choose something in the book that's particularly compelling and create a response to it. So that would even mean you could take the power analysis, which you already completed, and have your students do one too. That's probably not appropriate for super tiny students, so you might need to modify it or think for some other opportunity for reflection. I look forward to seeing what your capstone projects end up being, and I'm very excited to see the end of our semester and your graduation. Take care, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.